All right, ladies and gentlemen, again, welcome to another episode of Reactionary Opinions, the most based reactionary show on the African continent. D-Dogs here, what's going on there? Actually, or should I say Mr. Patriarch, his new name. What's going on there, Mr. Patriarch?
Yes. Being very patriarchal and very patriotic. Drinking beer like a good American. So
Good. I guess being patriarchal these days is like beating your wife or something, huh? That's what being patriarchal
something like
is today.
that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's the new patriarchy, I guess. Russell, what's going on here, man? Sir Russell, the based.
Yeah, week's going well so far. I'm just keen to chat about our subject tonight, and all amped.
Cool. So the topic of discussion this evening, now, you might know that a line that you see in a lot of our videos is faith, family, community, and nation. And I feel that myself, Dylan, and Russell are being reactionary. The role of money within a community is very important for the growth of that community, and how money works within a small community. And it was just an interesting topic that myself and Russell were chatting about on Saturday evening, and about how the role, how money would work, and the role of money and the lending of money would work in a smaller community. For example, a small community like Orania, although they don't technically have their own currency, they have their own sort of issued bills, I guess, almost like an IOU kind of thing. But they're not completely independent as a community yet. But we do feel like that sort of small community model is great towards building wealth over the long term. And Dylan's also going to talk to us a little bit about in the US, you have these small credit unions, which are sort of localized. They're called credit unions and stuff. That generally be referred to here in the South African context as banks that sort of lend out money, or financial service providers that lend out money at lower interest rates, and so on, within a small community. So what I'd like to discuss, Dylan, why don't you just sort of give us an idea of how these credit unions and stuff work in the US and what they're all about.
Yeah, sure. So a credit union. So, for example, the one that I'm most familiar with, I can speak about mine, my credit union back in Alaska. Basically, it's essentially like a member-owned bank. Think about it like that. So you pay an entrance fee, basically. The credit union holds on to that in trust. So if you leave, you could take the money with you when you leave. And once you are a member of the credit union, you have the rights to vote for who is on the board of your credit union and so forth. Also, as a member, a shareholder really in the credit union, you are able to get lower interest rates, typically than what you'd find at a regular commercial bank. And they send you out information about sort of how the bank's doing and stuff. And also, credit unions tend to be much smaller entities than something like Wells Fargo in the U.S. or F&B here, right? So there's quite a bit smaller. There's much more of a communal vibe to them, so you can pick up the phone and let me talk to Kimberly, basically, and very good customer service and whatnot, and in my opinion, much more enjoyable to do business with. So yeah, that's sort of in practice how our credit union operates.
Yeah, so I think the idea is, again, as a community, to sort of distance yourself from these large banks and that sort of thing, to I don't know, maybe keep the wealth of the community within the community. I guess that would probably be the idea of a community bank, or it's quite common in these rural states in America, like North Dakota. They have banks and stuff or states in the US would have state banks, which are within that particular state as a community as well. And those banks generally do pretty well. Those communities thrive that bank with those banks, and in that sense, those banks are generally able to loan money out to businesses and stuff at lower interest rates. Russell, you want to add something over there as well?
Yes, the idea of community banks is essentially, the way I see it, is that comes back to the old question where in today's world, as we have it right now with the massive money and big financial banks and financial institutions all over the world, essentially, and financialization of everything all over the place, essentially what has happened is that we, the people, serve the economy, all right? So we are basically at these large corporates, corporate banks' mercy, the way they can lend, not lend, inflate, deflate currency supply, and basically, essentially, along with the government, control our economy. So what happens is we end up being servants to the economy. But it is actually possible to have a situation where the economy can actually service and serve the people in it, and actually the people transacting every day amongst themselves. And that's the idea behind community banking or localized banking, or what you have in a situation, sort of anyway, like although it's not a currency like you said, the situation in Iran, it's trying to get the economy of a particular area to serve its people rather than service banks or a government or something along those lines. As regards to how these banks are usually set up, it's a little bit murky. They don't really, knowledge of how banks are set up and how exactly they work is very, very murky, and they keep it that way. But what I'm getting at is we have to try and look towards solutions where the people can be serviced by, because the people are participants in the economy. They're the ones who the economy should serve. It shouldn't be the other way around. And banking is at the very core of preventing the economy servicing us.
Yeah, correct. So I'm reading. I would like to read a little part from a book written by the late Stephen Mitford Goodson. It's called A History of Central Banking and the Enslavement of Mankind. It's a fantastic book, and I'd like to read you a little bit about this. When I said that, it's brilliant. Eh? What an excellent title. So
usury.
So I was actually wrong when I said that that all the US states have their own state banks. Okay, this is what it says in this book. It says in 1919, the 48 states of the United States, so obviously withstanding then probably Alaska and Hawaii, right? I'd assume, were offered the opportunity of setting up their own state banks. North Dakota was the only state bank state which accepted this offer. North Dakota's capital, Bismarck, has a population of 684,000, is situated in the middle of America on the Canadian border. Notwithstanding its harsh winters, its primary source of both direct and indirect income is agriculture. It ranks first in the United States with the production of wheat, mainly durum, barley, canola, flaxseed, oats, sunflower seeds, blah, blah, blah. So most of the states of America are technically insolvent. And with the exception of North Dakota and her western neighbor, Montana, all have been experiencing budget deficits. By way of comparison, California, the largest state in economic terms and currently the world's 12th largest economy, had a deficit of just under 23 billion in April of 2013 and pays out $10.4 billion in interest annually. Okay, so there's a big problem there already. You can see that. In 2012, its bond debt amounted to $167.9 billion, in contrast to the other 49 states, which have been suffering rising levels of unemployment. North Dakota's unemployment rate has decreased and is currently the lowest in the USA at 2.7%. It also has the lowest default rates in the country. In September 2012, North Dakota had a budget surplus of $1.6 billion. Between 1997 and 2010, its GDP grew by 93.4% from $16 billion to $31 billion. During the period of 2000 to 11, personal income per capita increased by 127% from $20,000 to $45,000 per annum, I'd assume, while the national increase was 37.4% over the same period. Listen to this. This is important. The secret of its success lies in its state bank. The mission statement of the bank is to provide sound financial services that promote agriculture, commerce, and industry. By law, the state must deposit all of its funds in the bank, which pays a competitive rate of interest to the state treasurer. So again, within the community, everything's controlled within the community. I found that line, that part of the book quite fascinating.
An interesting part about that is that essentially what that means is all the tax revenues are deposited into that bank, and then that bank then is very efficient then at lending that money back out to all the in the agricultural industries and etc. So it maintains all the money in that state. So you don't get predatory lending from outside of the state and it also encourages, it prevents running budget deficits as well.
Because the bank has a vested interest within the state, you understand? So if they didn't have that vested interest within the state, like some other banks outside of the state, they would then, be open to predatory lending like other banks outside of the state, which I find quite
in other words, they're responsible for the state, and then the state supports them, and that way the money circulates within North Dakota. It gets reinvested again into agriculture, which then boosts production, boosts capital investment, which boosts employment, which further boosts tax revenues, and that's how the circle sort of spins and provides for itself. And that's what it basically you're recapitalizing the state for the people the whole time.
Yeah, precisely.
I guess the only thing I'd add about the North Dakota thing, that's a very sharp rise in GDP numbers, and probably one of the main reasons for that is during that time period, and to this day, North Dakota is kind of at the epicenter of the U.S. shale oil boom. So, that has a lot to do with it. But I would be interested in sort of to what degree and these are facts I don't know, the state has been providing funding opportunities. The state bank has been providing loans for basically oil exploration and production at competitive, though non-usurious interest rates. So I'm just unsure about that stuff.
So that's an interesting question that you mentioned over there. And this, I would assume then, if the shale oil industry and stuff is booming in Dakota, then obviously the bank would then want to capitalize on it, because we all want to make money. So I'm pretty sure that is a big part of it. But just to read you this over here, this is kind of what Russell said over here. It says the bank pays over all its profits to the state, which in 2011 was $60 million. Over $450 million has been paid to the state in the past 11 years. Most of these funds are used to offset taxes. Remember what Russell said. The bank also provides a secondary market for real estate loans, guarantees for new business ventures, and loans for farmers at an interest rate of 1% per annum, which is...
It's quite low.
That is like... Wow, that is something
Just
else.
also another qualification of that, I think the data that is about 2013, which is pretty much the shale boom sort of days of North America's shale boom, but still, in principle, that is still a good principle, regardless of how much oil production was taking place in those days. The principle is actually it's communities' money. In other words, the economy of North Dakota serves the people doesn't serve the economy.
Yeah, well, so but basically, you know, the California and stuff is not a economically sovereign state. It doesn't own its own economy technically, okay? Whereas North Dakota, because of their state bank, they own their own economy. They are economically sovereign, which is they're pretty much the only economically sovereign state in the United States. That's interesting as well.
Yeah, and I guess sort of one of the things that I'm interested in terms of banking and whatnot is if you trend is the increasing household debt in the United States and all over the world for that matter. I know in South Africa, debt rates have been going up and up and up and up for years now. And banks obviously have an interest in extending more lines of credit because when they do that, they make more money, right? So they get paid on the interest. And of course, they create money through the issuance of loans. So the way fractional reserve banking works is the bank has a deposit of 10 Rand. They lend out 9 Rand. They hold 1 Rand in reserve. So they're essentially creating new money through this process. And, you know, they have an interest in sort of increasing that over time. And that all has two effects. So on the one hand, there's a demand for credit naturally, but by issuing all this credit, that has a upward pressure on asset prices, right? So if you're able to issue money, then you're going to see things like real estate go up and up and up and up, which is sort of what we've seen. And that's probably one of the best examples. Also, automobiles, they're not really, in the US anyways, they're not particularly designed to be very cost efficient. And part of that, of course, has to do with regulations. So CAFE standards, emission standards, and whatnot have been very detrimental to the affordable automobile in the United States. And you see that sort of thing happening also in Europe. So cars that could be manufactured, which are affordable and fuel efficient, simply aren't made because they don't fall within regulations. So you have all these sorts of things at play here. And one of the biggest, possibly the biggest one, is the issuance of money via central banks and commercial banks, which has an upward push on asset prices, which in turn encourages people to lend more so they can afford more and more things. And then you end up with a situation where nobody can buy a house. And that also has something to do with zoning. But another huge fact of the matter is that in addition to zoning restrictions, you have the issuance of new money, cheap money, fueling the price of these assets beyond what you would see were credit a lot more tight and people had to buy things with savings. So it's kind of anti-people in a way to a certain extent. And what caused the financial Great Depression, one of the things that you saw was things started getting really, so you had the stock market crash, but then what really started sending things tumbling down the hill is when you started having farmers across the Midwest defaulting on their loans. And a lot of these banks, there was regulations that prevented branch banking. So they were not particularly diversified in terms of risk. So they were sort of tied to the community. But because of when you have agricultural community and none of your farmers can pay back their loans, then the bank goes bust and the whole town goes bust. So this issue of money issuance is it causes all kinds of problems. So it's almost hard to imagine a world for me where you didn't have the mass issuance of credit, but we had it for a long time. And I don't know, I think possibly if during the Great Depression, the government announced a Jubilee period, like what you saw in ancient Israel, that might not have been the worst thing.
So talking into that point, I want Russell to touch on what the Christian idea of lending money, because you did kind of touch on it there, Dylan, as well. The idea of how Christians should actually lend and borrow money. Russell?
Yeah, look, my idea is that for the way historically, according to the Bible, the way you're supposed to lend, peer-to-peer on a peer-to-peer basis, is you're not supposed to lend to your brother, firstly, if you know that he is an irresponsible person. In other words, if he's a drug addict and doesn't have hasn't got his affairs in order, and he's going to use that money for drugs and alcohol, you're actually putting him into slavery, into bondage. All right. If you lend him money, secondly, if you lend him money, you know that he can't pay it back, you indebting him to you for sort of like a forever type of thing. That's also wrong. If you lend money to somebody and he's of good character and he actually can afford to pay it back, but due to unforeseen circumstances, he isn't able to pay it back, you are supposed to be in such a position to actually forgive that debt. And those are the sort of strict, well, I don't call it strict, but the idea behind lending to people within your church community or a brother in your church or something like that. That's the way I've always understood it.
No, I would agree with that. I don't see a real issue with that. I know that in the Islamic community, myself and Dylan were talking about this offline. The idea of I know in Christianity, it's technically traditionally, usury and lending at interest is also outlawed. But specifically in the Islamic community, you're not allowed to also lend money at interest. But also when it comes to investments and earning interest, you're not allowed to earn interest either. Although the modern day, in the modern Islamic or Sharia compliant investment world, there are mutual funds, but they are invested in across assets that that you're allowed to earn what they call profit sharing, or you're allowed to share in the profits of certain Islamic businesses, but you're not allowed to earn interest on money earned in alcohol, gambling, cigarettes, those sort of things. The sort of industries that come from a sinful nature, you're not allowed to earn interest on that, which I think that pretty much, if we were to be honest Christians and stuff, that's pretty much the Christian idea as well of lending and interest and all of that. I could be wrong. What do you think, Russell?
No, that's pretty much you and me are pretty much in agreement there. One of the things I'd quickly like to touch on is that the whole idea about banking and lending and financing and industrialization and maintaining the system going, it's one of those things that it doesn't seem that mankind has ever been able, and I don't know if it will ever be able, to balance the supply and demand of credit without inability to balance the forces of inflation and deflation. It appears to be that I don't know if there are any type of mechanisms that can be put in place, either through a legal regulatory framework or through market mechanisms that could actually address those sorts of things. I don't know if perhaps Dylan has any sort of idea on that.
I think probably one of the trickiest things in all this, I think part of a lot of the blame that some of the more trad Catholics and reactionary Muslims will lay at the feet of usury, I think can sort of be boiled down to fractional reserve banking, at least in modern times. So I think, look, with lending, I mean, I don't particularly, I as a personal choice, I really don't like debt, and I try to stay out of it. And if you do have debt, I think you should definitely pay it off as quick as you can. And, obviously don't do anything, any shady actions or toxic assets and whatnot. Those lending off those is, obviously fraudulent. But I think a lot of the problems that we're seeing today as regards the financial world has to do with fractional reserve banking. So through the constant ever increasing creation of money, this leads to a lot of those problems that I talked about earlier about constantly jacking up asset prices and whatnot, and sort of making things unaffordable. And, wages for people don't exactly track with inflation necessarily. That's certainly the case in the US. I know in South Africa, increases are, as you call them, we call them raises back home, but increases are a fairly regular thing here, but they're not in the United States. And a lot of the reason why you see people in the United States having a hard time being able to afford things is because of this artificial appreciation of asset value. Now, for the people who own them, they love to see it, right? So if you have a house in a neighborhood and it's going up $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, and you bought it at $50,000, you're happier than a pig in shit. But that does have some social ramifications, of course. And, there's a lot of malaise amongst my fellow millennials. Oh, I'll never be able to own a house and stuff like that. And I'm sure, even here in Cape Town, you see a lot of people who would like to afford a home, who make a decent living by South African standards, but just can't afford a place to live. Now, that also has something to do with foreign purchase of property, but also I think the constant rate of inflation that's going on does have something to do with it. And the wage increases that people do get do not keep up with the asset price inflation.
Dylan, it's almost like you're talking about a history of central banking and the enslavement of mankind.
Yes, almost. Yes.
So
have you read that book, Dylan?
No, I have not.
It's quite an interesting book. It's quite an interesting book, I must admit. Look, like I say, it does raise a few interesting questions about banking and whatever. But I don't know. The author seems to make it out a little bit simplistically, in my view. But anyway, that's just what I think.
He sees the central banker behind every tree. Yes. No, maybe I'll read that one after my book on fascism that I'm finishing up.
Oh, that's a delicious one. Are you reading it right now?
Yeah, I'm finishing up a book on fascism. It's really good.
Book? The older what's his name? Antonio. What's his name? No, not Antonio.
Gentile.
Gentile. Is that the one you're reading?
No. I'm reading it's a historical book. So it's called Fascism, the Career of a Concept. And it's basically about the historical context of fascism, what it is, how it differed across different countries, how the Iron Guard was different than fascist Italy, and so on and so forth. It's a very, very good academic treatment of the subject without a lot of, haranguing and it just so happens the guy who wrote it is a real a right winger of note. So the Antifa would call him an actual fascist, but basically his thesis is like, look, I don't particularly want to live in a fascist country, but it wasn't particularly normative fascism, and like Italy wasn't a particularly horrible phenomenon in world history, and it's sort of constrained to time and place. So to talk like fascisms today is nonsense.
What always fascinated me about fascism, which is what you mentioned as well, is every sort of brand of fascism had its own unique, totally unique brand. Like they were, like Mosley, for example, in the UK and everything, because it's a nation idea, and each nation is different and has their own different uniqueness. That's what the big difference between fascism and Marxism is that fascism is different everywhere it gets implemented or the idea gets hatched, whereas Marxism is the same here in South Africa as it is in China and all over the bloody world.
Right. Yeah. No, that's true. And yeah, so if anyone wants to read, it's called Fascism, the Creative Concept by Paul Gottfried, and it's published by Northern Illinois University Press. And it's very good. And one of the things that they, to tie it in with the banking thing, that the fascists sort of harangued about is, they're leery of, they don't like socialism, but they're also leery of global capital. So there's like this weird syncretic ideology that they came up with. But yeah, I mean, for forever, people have been, haranguing about the robber barons and central banks and whatnot.
So Oswald was always on about international monetary power and the power of money and money alone. He was always on about. He was always on about
arms of communists.
He was always going on to say they run an international system where the infinite mobility of money can be moved, can bring down any government it wishes.
So Russell, I just want to. We're going to do some closing statements now, but I just want to finish with the Bible verse that you were probably referring to when you were talking about how Christians should lend and all of that, and how you should actually forgive your debts. That's actually in Deuteronomy verse 15. It says, at the end of every 7 years you shall grant a release of debts, and this is the form of release. Every creditor who has lent anything to his neighbor shall release it. He shall not require it of his neighbor or his brother, because it is called the Lord's release. So that's what you were referring to with regards to lending. And so yes, you can lend money and stuff as a Christian and borrow money, but you should be in the position to forgive that debt should your guy able to pay it back. That's it. That's all I've got to say. Dylan, you want some closing statements there, brother?
No, and it would be interesting to see a world where some of these ideas took place, having, and particularly, I guess sort of the question I have is a wealthy, prosperous, first world country compatible with, no usury, I guess, or usury with restrictions, let's say, with sort of like a jubilee period or only short-term lending or something like that. I don't know, or a system without fractional reserve banking, but you could have regular loans. I don't know. These are all largely theoretical things to me, and they're interesting to think about. But I do think that a lot of the problems of the world do have to do with fractional reserve banking, and that does, not to get too conspiratorial, but I'm going to get conspiratorial, that does concentrate power, cultural power, in other avenues. So obviously I don't want the state to, control all the levers of power, but what we're seeing today with the soft power that is wielded by multinational corporations and whatnot, funded through fractional reserve banking and so on and so forth, is, it is a real concern. And I'm just not quite sure what the solution is.
Yeah, I think a practical solution to that may be, it might be a short-term fix or it might not be, but the only way that we can actually do that is, observe, even though it's not an actual currency. They do call it a currency in Oranje, the Aura, but it's not an actual currency because they can't pay municipal debts with that currency, as far as I know.
Mm.
But I think the only way that you are going to be able to escape that sort of thing is within these small communities, as micro communities. I think that's the only way that you are actually going to be able to escape these things, escape the ideas of fractional reserve banking and all of that, is to start these smaller communities that finance each other and declare their sovereignty against fractional reserve banking and enslavement of mankind.
Yeah. No, back in the day, I had an easy answer for this. Abolish the government, privatize everything, and it'll be fine. But no, I don't believe that anymore. So now I don't know what the answer is. I'm sorry, guys. I used to know. Now I don't know. Life was so easy when I was an ANCAP. The answers were all right there.
Oh, damn it. Russell, you got some closing statements there, brother?
Yeah, just quickly, people must... When people ask, those that aren't, who are just ordinary people going to work every day, eking out a living, things like recessions, depressions, financial crises, all these sorts of things, they come from, they don't just sort of happen, all right, out of nowhere. It is either the banks, the governments, the central banks, or a combination of those three. It's bad policy and bad sort of administration in that area. That's what causes recessions, depressions, and financial crisis moments. So, and the problem with that is just by me saying that, all right, means that us as the ordinary people in the street, all right, are not in control of our economy, okay? In other words, we are serving the economy through the interest and tax system, the government interest and tax system, but the economy is not serving us. We are the participants. We are the ones sweating and laboring, but we are the ones being subjugated by this thing. So we are at governments and banks' mercy through taxes, usury, regulations, and power. But we've got no say over it. And that is the essential story behind why monetary reform is essential to every reactionary movement. Monetary reform will have to be part of any reactionary government. There would have to be. I actually don't have the answers. I wish I could, but I'm saying what the problems are. I don't know what policy framework or regulatory framework or market mechanisms there could be to overcome this. But the thing that Scott said about localized community is probably a very good option as well.
Yeah, so that's the thing is I think we must, thrash these ideas out, get them out there. There's people that are way smarter than us that are going to be able to have light bulb moments and be like, yes, like Oaks, I've got it, I figured it out, or whatever,
I guess the only thing I'll say in response to Russell, I am reminded of a class I had at university once, speaking of how any reactionary movement must have a monetary angle to it. And I was in a European history class, and I was in a European history class, and we were talking about I can't remember exactly where. Maybe I wasn't in history. But anyways, it was during my time at university. And I recall that one of the Holy Roman Emperors of the Habsburg dynasty he was having these money problems, and he wanted to debase the currency so he could basically create more. And he was counseled strongly against that by, I guess it was the bishop or something, who told him he would literally go to hell if he stole from the people by debasing the currency. So he didn't do that.
Well, he was right.
He's like, yes, Holy Roman Emperor, you're going to go to hell if you if you steal from the people by basically the effect of printing money back in the day.
Well, I mean, the thing is, it essentially, like what you said earlier, quickly, fractional reserve banking shifts money to the wealthy already at the expense of the laborers.
Yo, Russell, the ANCAPs are going to call you a communist if you start talking like that.
Unfortunately, that's the one part that I am sympathetic towards. I mean, I'm not a complete one-dimensional capitalist free market oak. You know what I mean? I accept. I'm sympathetic to certain aspects of their arguments.
Yeah. No, 100%. Anyway, thank you again for listening, folks. Anything else you guys want to add? Mr.
I'm good.
Patriarchy. Go and check out Mr.
Done. I'm
Patriarchy's
done.
channel.
Yeah,
It's
Mr.
brilliant.
Patriarch.
He's got some seriously based videos on there. Some nice spicy content.
Yes, you can find me on there. YouTube, Mr. Patriarch. I'm literally the only one called Mr. Patriarch, so it'll be easy to find.
Attaboy. Russell, you got anything to add there, brother?
I'm done.
Cool. Thank you so much for listening. Remember to subscribe, share, like, go check out our Facebook, our Twitter, all of that. Thank you so much for listening, guys. Stay reactionary out there because
God wills it.
God wills it.
Well, hello there. If you've made it this far, it means that you really enjoy the reactionary material. Remember to subscribe, share the content, and if you have any questions or any statements or anything that you'd like to let us know, just leave it down in the comments section and we will definitely 100% respond to your comments or your questions. Thank you again for joining us. Stay reactionary out there. God bless everyone. And remember, God wills it.